some of these ideas. The physicist that actually headed up the Bell was, in fact, a Nobel laureate by the name of Professor Dr. Walter Gerlach, who's one of the most famous physicists in the world at that time.
Mm-hmm.
He's right up there in the league with Albert Einstein.
Mm-hmm.
So Gerlach's specialty was gravitation and magnetic spin and things like this, and he is also the man that mentored another famous German physicist by the name of Hilgenberg,
mm-hmm.
who developed his own very unique vortex mechanics as kind of an alternative to relativity theory.
Huh.
So there is this massive theoretical impetus that's taking place in Nazi Germany and even in the Weimar Republic, if one really goes back far enough, to develop some of these ideas. And I think the Bell really kind of represents the culmination of some of that thinking.
Interesting. And speaking of this alternative physics, this is something then that they actually were potentially utilizing in the technology. Is there a connection here with the entire alchemy and mercury thing? Is this it?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Mm.
One of the things that Witkowski even points out in his book, The Truth About the Wunderwaffe, is that the Bell apparently relied on some form of mercury isotope and most likely other elements in compound with it. And this, I think, is an interesting thing because Gerlach writes an article in 1928, I believe it is, from Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, in which he speculates on the ability of mercury under stress to transmute into other elements, and he calls it a form of alchemy.
Yeah.
So in other words, he is thinking very specifically along the lines that you're suggesting. And I think, given the fact that Germany is also home at the time to some of the world's premier Assyriologists and Sumerologists, that he probably is aware of some of these alchemical texts and ideas. So I don't discount that possibility at all. I think that is definitely in play.
Interesting. And potentially then, do you think that that the Bell itself actually is a flying machine or an opening of portals? What's your, do you speculate on this at all?
Oh yes, I do. I do believe, and this is kind of where I part company somewhat with Nick Cook and Igor Witkowski. I do believe that the Bell is primarily a weapon, and in fact, I'm kind of beginning to write a sequel to the SS Brotherhood of the Bell in the last week or so.
Oh, fascinating.
Trying to outline some more things that I've discovered about it. I do think it was a weapon. However, I think that in the process of developing and testing the physics for this device, that they also knew that it would have certain anti-gravitational effects, and that those in turn, by the nature of the case, implied manipulations of space and time. I don't go so far as to say it's a time machine or a portal or anything like that, but those effects nevertheless would have been present in the device simply on the basis of the physics involved.
Interesting. I read that there is a connection, or someone make the connection, and you have to clarify exactly who makes this assertion and so forth, but that there was a potential opening of some kind of, I guess we could refer it to a stargate, and actually traveling through a planetary system in the Andromeda galaxy, right?
Well, I don't mention those in my books, but that is a story, a legend that's been around really since the end of the war, that there was some sort of project, apparently named Project Andromeda, at least in the sources I've been able to find, that indicated that at least for some of these secret societies, the ultimate goal of their physics projects was some sort of portal or gate or ability to travel to extremely distant worlds. I've, again, never been able to pin down, to my satisfaction, where this effort originated within Germany, or even what became of it. It's just a story story that simply is there and it doesn't go away.
Yeah.
So that to me indicates that there's probably some basis in truth to it, but it also, I think, has to be tempered by the physics realities that were in place at the time of the war, that it would have been just simply beyond anyone's technology to pull that off.
Yeah.
If the Bell did something like that, if it were able to do something like that, it would have been, I think, an effect that the Nazis really weren't intending to find. They may have found by accident. But I should stress something very significant. If they did find effects like that, the physics would have been so inimical and deadly to any biological life that it would have made such teleportation or transportation just a physical impossibility for a biological life form. And in fact, I get into some of the very strange and deadly effects that the Bell had when it was in operation in the book. But again, that also implies that there were temporal displacements or time displacements, and they were probably very significant.
So it's kind of a Raiders of the Lost Ark scenario, I guess.
Yes, exactly so. That's a very good analogy.
Yeah.
It's a project that's so black and so dark that, once again, I stress this, that the Nazis went out of their way to keep this project from falling into anybody's hands at the end of the war.
Yeah.
That means the Americans, the British, the French, the Russians, whoever.
Yeah.
It was viewed by them in all of the literature that I've been able to see as being their decisive war-winning weapon. And that's precisely how they viewed it.
So, I mean, to me, this brings to mind the United States, again, alleged a project called the Philadelphia experiment. Have you heard about this?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Any connection, you think?
I do think that there's a connection.
Yeah.
I think it's a connection actually in some of Einstein's pre-war unified field theory papers. But I think in the case of the Philadelphia experiment as opposed to the Nazi Bell, I think that there is a fundamental difference. I don't think that we were looking for what we found, and I don't think we knew what to do with it once we found it. I think that the effects of the experiment rather surprised the people that were conducting it. In fact, one American physicist, after the experiment was done, had a nervous breakdown that was so severe that teams of Navy doctors had to kind of nurse him back to health. But in the case of the Nazi Bell, I think that the Germans were intentionally looking for what they found. I think they found it, and moreover, I think they knew what to do with it once they did find it. So I think in that respect the experiments are somewhat different.
Yeah.
But I do think they arise out of the same basic physics conceptions.
Very interesting. And do you think that this was in what sense, if you want to go into it, of course, but in what sense, was this a deployable weapon? What were the effects, so to speak?
Well, the effects are very interesting. The Germans tested the Bell device on a number of different organic material, animal life, plant life, reptiles, insects, and unfortunately probably some inmates and victims from concentration camps. When it was first tested, it killed 5 out of the 7 scientists involved. It turned plants into a kind of a black, greasy goo within a matter of hours after it tested, and oftentimes it would do that without the plants putrefying. In other words, they wouldn't even go off an odor; they just fell apart. I think the Germans were able, to some extent, to limit some of these effects later in the project, but ultimately the effects remained. So this is, I think, part of why they were conceiving of it as a weapon. To put it very briefly, the Bell is based on a physics that is capable of locally engineering space-time curvature. So once one has said that, one, of course, opens the door to time displacements, to being able to rip the fabric of space and time. And, of course, once we've said that we are in the possession of a physics and a basic technology that theoretically is going to make a hydrogen bomb look like a kitchen bench. So this is why I think the Nazis classified it with the extreme classification that they did. They knew exactly what they had their hands on. That being said, to answer your other question, I think that this device represented for them a kind of a prototype device to investigate various areas of this physics. I don't think itself was an actual practical weapon. It was more of a test bed for some of their ideas.
Oh, okay, I see. Very interesting. You know, one thing I did want to kind of throw out here, I guess, is, you know, considering the again the alleged, you know, thread of cross-nation, if I can say it, that funding, you know, there are threads of information leading to that, you know, American corporations and families and whatnot actually, you know, were funding the buildup of the Nazi empire, as it were.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and I mean, couldn't, in a sense, I mean, if the Nazis were over there developing their from their end, so to speak, but the main product, so to speak, of what they actually achieved over there would easily, you know, have been moved or shifted over to, you know, another area of the world or whatever, considering that, you know, that they themselves might not have been the main backers of the funding, so to speak, of the technologies that they developed.
Well, that's another excellent question, because the peculiar thing about the Bell and the technology it represents is it just more or less drops off the face of the earth at the end of the war. No one really knows where it went. There is every indication, strong indication, that this SS general that I mentioned earlier, Hans Kammler, he disappears entirely at the end of the war. Now, you know, how does a four-star SS general simply disappear and not ever be heard from again? And the other thing that disappears along with him and the Bell and all of the project documentation is this gigantic six-engine Junkers 390 aircraft, which is an aircraft that is capable of nonstop flight from Germany to Argentina. So there's really two lines or two avenues that are probable that the Bell went. It either came to this country and disappeared into some super secret American Black Projects research program, or it disappeared into an independent and continuing Nazi research program inside of Argentina. And before we discount that possibility, I think your listeners should be made aware of the fact that President Perón of Argentina built for the Nazi scientists that had come to his country during the war a huge modern plasma physics laboratory in a remote province of Argentina called Bariloche. And this plasma physics lab is more or less exactly the type of physics that the Germans were tinkering around with the Bell, so it would have been a logical place for them to take it. So your question is an excellent one, because it points out that the money trail is a crucial component of where to look.
Sure.
If we pursue the Argentine angle or line, then, of course, the Nazi penetration and connections with various South American drug cartels would be a source of funding to them. And if we pursue the American line, then, of course, it's the American taxpayer ultimately that's funding it.
Sure. So, I mean, there's a whole, you know, can of worms, so to speak, if we go into, you know, that many of the Nazis actually went to South America, could continue their work there, went, you know, somewhat underground, as it were. There's even a thread that many of the Nazis actually went to, you know, Neuschwabenland down in Antarctica and so forth. Anything that you favor of those theories?
Well, it's interesting that you ask that, because when I wrote the SS Brotherhood of the Bell, I kind of favored the disappearance into America line.